This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Brett Young. Change the game with BY7204LL, Brett Young's newest canola hybrid with Liberty Link technology.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. We're going to have a RealAg Issues panel today. It's going to be a lot of fun. We have lots to break down. I was in Ottawa this week. Lyndsey and I were together on Wednesday at the CAPI Sustainability Conference. We'll talk about that, as well as we got a jobs report in the U.S. We got updates on what's happening with all the strikes in the U.S. and in Canada, that and a whole lot more. Today on the panel, we'll be joined by Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture. We'll also be joined, we got a newbie to the program. We've got Evan Shout joining us. Now, he is with Farmer Coach, Maverick Ag, the consulting company, as well as he is host of the Truth About Ag podcast. So it's going to be great to have Evan here and get his perspectives as well. If you have any feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all of the different social media channels. You're also more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Short intro today. Let's get to the panel. We'll do that when we come back.
Your Co-op Grow team are your local experts because we live here too. Our agronomic specialists stay up to date with the latest research and technology to help support your entire farm operation. Talk to our team for advice tailored to your farm's needs. We have recommendations to help you optimize your crop yield and quality while enhancing the health of your land. Co-op. We're all growing together. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
It's now time for a product spotlight with New Seed. Sean Walker, field sales manager for Montana. Tell us about the key benefits to the grower in North Dakota and Montana for the program this year.
We've got some really attractive premiums. This year with our contract, actually a lot more flexibility in pricing. Canola markets aren't that great, but by being able to do the omega-3 program, one, we've got those premiums, and two, they're going to be able to honestly market this crop for, if they've signed a contract today, almost 2 years, which is really nice. Out here in Montana and North Dakota, we are somewhat in the middle of nowhere. Our contract is a freight on board contract, so picked up on farm, which is really nice. Still have an active God with this contract, and these guys, they get to choose when they want to deliver as well. So some really positive pieces that when a grower is trying to decide, how can I make this work for my farm? The omega-3 program really thinks about how we can bring this specialty market to these growers.
That website is omega3canola.com. Great opportunity for growers in Montana and North Dakota. And welcome back to RealAg Radio here for the RealAg Issues panel. Lots to break down. I was on the road all week, so I've got some thoughts from some of the conversations from the hallway. Conferences, I typically am in the hallway guy, not an in the room guy, and I was roaming the hallways and getting all the latest scuttlebutt on what's going on in Canadian ag. So we'll talk about some of that. Hey, the best answer for agronomically effective dual nitrogen protection? It's Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how this ready-to-use granular fertilizer protects nitrogen and boosts efficiency, visit kochag.ca. Let's bring the panel in, see what they are up to this week. We'll get their perspectives as well, of course. Kelvin Heppner coming in about Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are we doing?
Doing well here, Sean. The sun is shining. Soybean harvest is wrapping up in this area. Corn harvest is underway, and things are rolling along.
Did your soybeans have a 7 in front of them in terms of yield, like I've been hearing over there in Manitoba?
The last number was a 7, not the first number. Yeah.
Okay, well, as long as the first number wasn't like a 4 or a 3.
No, it was. We definitely had above average yields, and probably think when it all shakes down, if we do the math, it probably was our best soybean yield that we've had on our farm.
That is awesome. Congratulations. Do you think we're going to, because of these strong results, we're going to see a big expansion in acres next year of soybeans in Manitoba?
I don't think Well, there might be a little bit, but part of it is just August rain. You can offer congratulations, but it's really just the August rains that I think added 10, 15 bushels in the end.
So humble.
And also, well, it wasn't anything we did. And also, I think the soybean acres. So soybean acres in Manitoba and northern growing area here have pulled back from where they were a couple of years ago, and we're back to growing them on the better suited soybean areas. Genetics are also improving in the meantime. So yeah, I think that I will be cautious in terms of expanding acres in the next few years. I think still.
Everybody, Kelvin's very modest. What he did was, it actually had a lot to do with what he did on the farm, because he was watching the Soybean School, and you can find those episodes by going to soybeanschool.com. Be like Kelvin. It's a rule I live by. Lyndsey Smith, coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how you doing?
Great. Good to see you again. Twice in 1
yes,
week.
We saw each other earlier this week. That was Wednesday, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. The week is just one big jumble of stuff. It's been busy. But yes, it was lovely to be downtown at the Cappy meeting. So
you fought the Ottawa traffic.
Oh God, it was terrible. It rained, so apparently everyone forgot how to drive. And anyway, but I will say, it is always wonderful, especially this time of year because the weather's been beautiful, to drive in, park, and take just a little walk to where we were at the National Arts Center, right?
Yes,
and
we were. Yes.
yes, and so you get to walk around the War Memorial. You're right there. Like, it is downtown Ottawa, I will say, in that area around Parliament. It's just beautiful, and it's so cool to be able to be like, this is my work day today. Just walking on down through this and into the, yeah. So anyway, it was really cool and a fantastic meeting, which we're going to talk about.
It was really good. We will get to that first here. Also joining us today, he is a first-timer to the panel. We are glad to have him here. It is Evan Shout. He is with Farmer Coach and the host of the Truth in Ag podcast, which you can find as well on Real Agriculture. Evan, how are we doing? Welcome.
I'm doing good. I mean, harvest is over, the sun's shining. Obviously, we're a little colder than I like for this time of year, but I'm not complaining, and I probably won't. So,
Evan, I feel like you're in my camp that winter is not your ideal time of the year.
I'm not a huge fan, and possibly going back to your Ottawa comment on the drivers, Saskatoon is not a place you want to be on the first snowfall of the year. So I'll go with that one.
That's
okay. Now tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So obviously work with Christian Hebert on Hebert Grain Ventures, came across as CFO, and then realized that really wasn't a full-time job. So turned into Maverick, which is our consulting division, and then obviously the coaching division, and then the podcast. And honestly, if we just learn to say no to opportunities, we probably have more time on our hands, but that seems not to happen very often. So,
oh, good stuff. Well, it is great to have you here, and we'll get your perspectives, and looking forward to getting in the rotation here. Like I said, the Truth in Ag podcast, you can find it wherever you get your podcasts, as well as at Real Agriculture. And Evan does a great job, him and Christian, interviewing it. This week's guest was Clint Fisher, right?
Yeah, he was good. He was surprising. I know him more on obviously social media, and then once we got into the succession and transition talks, it went way further than I thought we were going. So I learned a lot, which is part of what I'm learning about podcasting. Is I'm getting probably just as much out of it as we're giving all the viewers, especially through RealAg. So
yeah, cool.
I listened in the combine on Wednesday afternoon, and yeah, it was full of insightful stuff. I really appreciate both you, Evan, your comments, also Clint Fisher, lawyer from South Dakota, lots of insight in terms of succession, and actually some really deep. I got into some deep stuff there too at the end. So people should
I'm not an emotional guy, and that was a little further than I probably was comfortable taking it. But you know what? The message was right, so I'm all for it. So it came out good in the end. So
great stuff. Okay, Lyndsey, this week in Ottawa, you and I were together at Cappy had a conference all about Canadian sustainability in a global world. The title was long. It was a great 2 days. Okay, it was 2 hard, heavy days. Day 1 on basically sustainability in agriculture. Day 2 was more on benchmarking. People were really geeking out on Scope 3 emissions, and it was a little bit too big for my head, but it was very fascinating. Now, I hosted a panel, and the panel was, should sustainability be Canada's number 1 competitive advantage, which produced some very interesting perspectives. But Lyndsey, what did you learn from, you were there Wednesday. What was your takeaway from Wednesday?
So, yeah, it was an incredible day. A fantastic lineup of panelists and some really diverse perspectives, which is really neat. There, everybody from aquaculture and of course, beef and grain and soybeans all the way to lumber, which I do think I was somewhat surprised maybe by hearing directly from people within the lumber industry and some of the parallels really to what we deal with in conventional agriculture about, some of these sustainability initiatives, pressure, public sentiment, etc. So that was, really fascinating to hear sort of those perspectives. I like that not everyone totally agreed, which was great. I think that some of the questions that came out of the audience, really putting pressure on, I think it was Aaron Garelick that said, everyone talks about sustainability as an it, like what is it? Who is paying for it? And I think that is actually a really great question to be asking. But one of the things I think, and specifically from the panel that you hosted, Shaun, was this question of venture cap money and this question of investment. And I can't help but think that there's a lot more to explore on this one in that we know that there's money out there to be had as far as investments in new technology and pushing things forward. But they often, or at least what I observe, is that we're trying to bring in these people with no real sense of what agriculture is or how it works. And they're sort of keeping the same measures of success of venture cap funding in a situation where this is an industry that is biologically based. We are seasonal. We are season based. There's only so much you can do each year. And I think we're going to talk about land values as well. Farms are often in a lot of ways, year by year, maybe not the most cash flow positive, but over time build an incredible amount of equity in the land base that they have. And I think that there's a lot more to discuss here on how we can actually streamline some of this investment into agriculture by having some hard conversations about what it actually looks like kind of on the ground and at the farm.
Evan, if I was to ask you, should sustainability be our number one priority, not a priority, but the number one priority, our number one competitive advantage, what would you answer with?
I probably got two answers for you. One is when you say sustainability, I want your definition because I'm pretty sure we created it to begin with. So, and you're talking to a recovering accountant, so sustainability to me is being able to pay the paycheck. So, but no, I get what you're saying on the sustainability front. It's probably a word that we're getting tired of hearing. So, from that side, okay. The other side of it is, and Christian went over to COP and we had the GIFS data, which came out of Saskatchewan, out of the University of the U of S. We are one of the most sustainably growing crops in Canada and in the world. The data doesn't lie. We're already doing the carbon side better than Ukraine, US, a whole bunch of other markets. The problem is nobody knows about it. And they not to jump on the feds, but federally, we don't advertise it. We don't tell them that we are probably growing the most sustainable crops and cereals and peas and canola in the world. We just criticize. So for me, that sustainability side is we're already there. It's just nobody knows about it. And even if they know about it, and I know that we might be touching on it, but the rail strikes, the port strikes, we're not considered a reliable trading partner anymore. So when you look at it, even if we have the most sustainable grains, everybody's scared they can't get it anyway. So not to go too far into the weeds and, up in the sky, but that's my thought of it. Yep. We're already there.
Kelvin, we had the answers up at the front and the panelists were great. They were fabulous. There was everything from, yes, it should be our number one competitive advantage, to no, because it's pre-competitive, meaning it's table stakes. There was no, I don't know why we're even having this conversation. This is dumb. I'm simplifying, but Ben did a great job. And number 4 was no, it's a competitive advantage, but not our number one competitive advantage. So what would you pick one of those?
I would probably go with the last one, I think, just as a quick answer. I think part of the issue here, what Evan and Lyndsey have both alluded to, is the definition and measurement and agreed upon standards here. We don't have a system where trading partners and customers necessarily agree with how the data is collected, or everybody has their own biases there. And Evan talks about the Canadian government not talking about it. We've gone actually a step worse with Bill C-59, the anti-greenwashing bill that now actually throws legal questions about whether we can actually talk about stuff like the Global Institute food security data that Evan alluded to that showed Canadian crops in a really positive light from carbon emissions. So that's where, I think we need to have a foundation of agreed upon information and data here. And that's a base starting point, which I'm not sure we have. And so until we get to that point, we need to be selling on price and on reliability as a reliable supplier, like Evan talked about with infrastructure and that type of thing. So I don't think we're at the point yet where we should go all in on selling on sustainability.
Do we get hung up on we don't have a definition too much? Like we have so much variability across the country, how we farm, what we farm. Why does it have to be one definition?
It doesn't have to be one definition. It has to be something, though, that our customers recognize. If our customers don't recognize what we're describing as sustainability, it doesn't mean anything to them. There's no value.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, we got to take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Doing more in the field is possible when you add the proven power of Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next generation dual-active urease inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. Driven by Duramide technology, Anvil gives growers the advantages of low application rate and long-lasting protection, all thanks to Duramide, a Koch-patented active ingredient. Defend against volatilization, boost efficiency, accomplish more. Learn all about the dual-active power of Anvil by visiting anvil.ca. That's ANVOL.ca.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from realagriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
Get ready for tillage season with the high-speed disc from Brandt. Cut and size residue, create ideal seed beds, and level ruts faster than any other tillage machine. It's a better field finish and fewer passes, so you can stay on schedule, no matter what fall throws at you. And right now, you can get yours with a $12,000 rebate. There's never been a better time to bring your operation up to speed. Visit Brandt.ca for details.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. RealAg Issues panel. Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, and Evan Shout of Farmer Coach and the Truth in Ag podcast. Listen up, Montana and North Dakota farmers and also northern Minnesota growers. The new seed omega-3 canola production system can help you unlock a guaranteed path to market with attractive premium opportunities, first-in-class agronomy support, and free on-farm pickup after harvest. To learn more, visit omega3canola.com. Let's, Kelvin, jobs report out of the U.S. Really shocking people to the upside. I think the number was 100,000 jobs over what the expectation was.
Yeah, 254,000 non-farm payrolls in September. So average hourly wage growth of 0.4%. Year-over-year change is 4% higher. So yeah, this is better than expected results. Unemployment fell from 4.2 to 4.1%. So it sounds like in terms of this being an indicator, this probably will not accelerate the Federal Reserve's plans for cuts. So maybe not a 50 basis point cut in November, but maybe just a 25 basis point. They're likely to continue cutting, but maybe not at as quick a pace, since this is a sign that the economy maybe is more resilient than some other indicators we're seeing.
Yeah, wages strong. I think unemployment was at 4.1%. So things, some strength there, which is good for the Canadian economy as well. Let's be honest about that. I think the next Fed meeting, the FOMC meeting, is the first week of November. So we're going to get another jobs report before then. To see what they do. Evan, in terms of impact of these rate decreases that we've had in Canada, we're 75 points down, Kelvin, from the high, right?
Oh, man, you're putting me on the spot.
I think it's 75.
So. Sounds right.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, so let's go with 75.
That's the accountant on the panel.
Recovering
account. It's just like we've got a lot of recovery here. I'm a recovering seed grower. He's a recovering account. That's we've all got issues we're dealing with our therapist.
Right.
Okay, Evan, when we look at the impact of these interest rates coming down, what are you hearing from some of your clients at Maverick and in your peer groups with Farmer Coach? Are people responding to that, or are they still very much in like kind of a let's wait and see how all this shakes out? Like, is it driving any change?
To tell you the truth, even when we were at the high, I wouldn't say it would have a huge effect on, farmer buying, whether it was land, whether it was equipment. It never slowed. And I almost tie it back to the cabins and the boats theory of people in the big cities, right? The spending, I mean, that's why our inflationary numbers went where they went, is because the spending never stopped. So for me, I mean, yes, it might have made some decisions a little harder, and they might have taken the interest on the teeth a little bit more, but it didn't stop buying. And we saw that with obviously the land values increases the last couple of years. And then, I mean, going into this year, if anything, the drop in interest rates, I've ran more equipment deals and more land deals in the last few months than I probably did the last couple of years. So if anything, it's just going to expedite or compound, which is good for agriculture. But at the same time, it's a hard concept when we probably had one of a below average year for 24, and 25 is not looking much better right now.
Yeah, it's not. Lyndsey, FCC, Farm Credit Canada, came out with their mid-year land value report. What does it show?
Well, I'm just going to pull it up right now because, all right. So average for Canada, definitely for the first 6 months up 5.5, which I got to say, pretty strong, especially in the face of all of us saying, are we going to see a giant drop off? But realistically, still year over year, last 12 months, 9.6, still really strong. Now, we definitely have certain provinces, as usual, that are a shining example of growth and others that are really struggling. And of course, where Evan is, the last 6 months, 7.4%. It led in Saskatchewan.
It was the highest.
7.4. It was the highest. Yeah. Ontario, where I am, only 2.1, so quite low. Manitoba, Kelvin lands in the middle, 3.9% for the year. So, yeah.
That Saskatchewan number, though, that we need to keep in mind when Farm Credit has run the value relative to return scenario, Saskatchewan farmland, and I know when I give speeches in Saskatchewan, they're like, stop talking about this. Stop it. It's undervalued. It probably has the most potential to continue to go higher, which I know everybody wants to keep as a big secret. But Evan, this data kind of confirms what you were just talking about.
Well, and I think it's been known for a while. It's not a secret, especially if you're living in Saskatchewan, because the majority of farms that are getting bought up, they're coming from out of province because guys see it as a deal. And I mean, the other one is you look at this and you look at the land values, and there's still competition out there. Like, people investors talk about other purchasing power. What's driving up land prices in Saskatchewan is that we do have a lot of working capital on quite a few farms from the last few years of commodities. Guys are willing to go there. And it's not even based on the productive capacity of the land anymore. There's areas that are brown soil that are out yielding land values of black soil in other areas. There is no measure that makes sense right now. It's literally how much competition in that area.
Wow. Kelvin,
is the number of bids dropping, Evan? Like, if there's a deal, is it 3 farms competing for that land versus 15 a few years ago?
I would say so, but I think that's a scale thing. Like, I think it's based on 10 years ago, you could buy a quarter of land here and a quarter of land there. That's not the way it is anymore. Now it's 2,000 acre farms or 3,000 acre farms. And if you take a $4,000, dollar per acre number, 12 million is not something very many people are comfortable eating at this point. And that's what's doing it. It's pulling the bids back because of the scale of how much you have to spend. And guys aren't willing to piecemeal it off anymore. They want someone to come in and just take the whole thing.
Makes sense.
And if we do have the land prices continue to go higher across the country, at the same time where we're seeing farm profitability go the other way and into the negative, it does kind of take a little bit of the wind out of the sail, I would say, a little bit, everybody, doesn't it? When it comes to like, hey, we need help or programming, because I think for people outside the industry, like, wait a minute, this math doesn't, I'm confused here. What's really happening? Is that kind of fair, Kelvin?
Yeah, I think so. Eventually, it does catch up as that working capital erodes, and if costs remain high and profitability is not positive for you erode that equity that's built up, and so yeah, eventually it will happen. It has to turn around if this trend continues for a long time. But I guess it maybe isn't turning around as quickly as what we maybe would have expected with the higher rates and some of the higher the poorer profitability scenarios right now.
Yeah, Lyndsey, we saw this week, the September results came out for the CME Purdue Ag Barometer, and pretty negative. Jim Mintert from Purdue I watched the webinar, and he's like, "This is pretty negative stuff." Like it definitely some concerns in the U.S. farming sector. And that index is heavily weighted to corn and bean farms. I would say that, we're going to do our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index for October here in about 10 days. So we're going to be able to compare and contrast. So everybody look out for that. But Lyndsey, clearly right now in Canada and the US, I would say that people are getting their calculators and they're having to sharpen their pencils if they're going to try to etch out a profit here.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I mean, it's not news, and that is, I think, one of the things that the longer sort of this goes on, the more we see that reflected in sort of that short-term outlook, and then of course to the longer term when we look a year ahead, which is what we'll do in our sentiment index as well. So realistically, we have at least some good news on the yield side. So as we saw, for some areas of Western Canada, certainly here in Ontario, and plenty of areas of the U.S., there's lots of crop to sell, just prices are pretty much not terribly profitable. And so even if you've got a lot of crop to sell, it's not nearly as exciting or make you feel very good. And we've still got input costs that we have to deal with that haven't maybe come down as quickly as crop prices have. So, overall profitability, sure, is going to be a concern. But I mean, to Evan's point, you can't run a farm successfully and not be thinking about, worst case scenarios or running your break evens or you've got to be watching your numbers and looking longer term. Anyone who thinks that, the heady times of 2022 were going to last forever, isn't going to stay in business very long. Let's face it. So, most farms, if you've sat down and recognized where your risks are, you want to be planning for years that are less than stellar and be able to ride it out. And those that do the planning will. And to the point, of buying land, even when interest rates are higher, et cetera, if you've put that money away when times were good, you can capitalize on some of these opportunities when they come up.
And, it's when we move into these kind of financial environments, we're reminded, when things were good, like when things were really great, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that. We can have some hindsight. We're all going to go through that. But I do think about financial acumen. This is a period when times are tight where we really sort of separate the wheat and the chaff. So I went back to some research we had done at Real Agri Studies, and we asked, I feel as if I could improve my financial acumen. Okay, so I'm not rating myself. I'm just saying, could I improve? So you could be at the very bottom, you could be at the very top, but just, hey, do I need to improve? 31% said completely agree. 50% said somewhat agree. And then it just drops off a cliff, right? Only 2% said completely disagree. 5% somewhat disagree. So, pretty much a high majority of farmers across the country, across all the sectors saying, Evan, I really need to improve in the area of financial acumen.
I got job security.
Well, there's that. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do any of those numbers surprise you at all?
No, not at all, to tell you the truth. And I mean, it's not that guys don't want to, it's that they're already making a million decisions. It's hard to be an expert in every area. And usually finance is the one that gets left. And don't get me wrong, they talk to their accountants once a year, and that's 3 months after year end, and they find out they made money or lost money. That's where things have changed. You can't do it anymore. And I mean, for us, the bigger discussion this year was, Lyndsey said it right. The yields, I mean, in a lot of areas were above average. And if anything, yes, there was still some drought areas, but let's call it an average year. So if you got 10-year average yields, that's what we're budgeting for. So it's not a yield issue right now. And then if you go back to pricing, I mean, canola right now, $13.50, $14. We were selling for $9.50 4 years ago, guys. So I mean, looking at the pricing on, certain crops and saying, oh, it's a disaster. That doesn't work either. The real problem is that our costs have become so inflated, and you can blame equipment, you can blame labor. A lot of it's just farm management wise, because I still have farms that have really low cost structures. They had to manage into that. So it's the cost structures are what's throwing all this stuff off, is that saying we had a terrible year, the sentiment's down, the stresses are higher. It's not because we didn't grow a crop, and it's not because the prices weren't available sometime during the year. It's that our costs are so high, we've just created our own worst enemy right now.
Yeah. Well put. Okay, we're going to take a break, but first, I want to mention the best answer for agronomically effective dual nitrogen protection is Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how this ready-to-use granular fertilizer protects nitrogen and boosts efficiency. I love efficiency. Love it. Visit kochag.ca. So does Lyndsey. She's smiling. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, right after this.
If you have a growing list of questions about getting more from your fields, know that Koch Agronomic Services has an answer for every acre. With a full spectrum of nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement options, Koch Agronomic Services offers a deep portfolio of agronomically effective products. Each designed to enhance yield potential, all available to help solve your problems. Find the answer that's right for your acres. Start by visiting kochag.ca. That's Koch ag.ca.
What were the issues in your fields this year? Did you do a soil sample? What is your soil sample telling you about some of the nutrient issues that you might be having going into next year? What herbicides did you use? What residues you might be concerned about? What weed issues did you have? What crop residues did you have? How well do you know your fields?
Get the answers to all the questions you have about your pulse crop at the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
And we are back here on RealAg Radio. Evan Shout, host of the Truth in Ag podcast. Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of Real Agriculture. Hey, nitrogen fertilizer. We've been talking about some of the increased costs. It is your number one expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. Okay, Kelvin, this week I was in Ottawa, like we were talking, but there's a lot that happened on the Hill this week and in some of the hallways that I was walking around in when it comes to some of the private members' bills that are having to be dealt with. Let's start off with 234. This is the private members' bill that has to do with an exemption on some farming activities relative to the carbon tax. What's the update on that one?
Yeah, this is the big bill that got gutted by the Senate last December. It would have removed the carbon tax on propane and natural gas used on farms for heating barns, grain drying, that type of thing. Now it's been stripped back to just grain drying and just for a couple of years instead of an 8-year timeline. It was potentially going to be back on the House of Commons docket this week, but there's a lot going on in the House right now. And so it's been bumped back. It did not make it onto the agenda. It's now on for October 28th, later this month. So right now, this is the stripped back version, and the NDP and Bloc are in favor. It's a question now of whether the Conservatives will vote in favor of this bill and take their lumps with a stripped back version or gutted version of it here. There's potential for a new private members bill to also be introduced around this that would bring back all those measures that were taken out by the Senate and potentially even go further and include commercial grain drying as an exemption from the carbon tax in here. I don't see much runway for that another private members bill to make its way through the parliamentary process before our next federal election, but it would at least be on the table and in the window kind of thing in terms of a talking point that farm groups that want to keep pressure on government regarding this would be able to refer to. Like you said, though, Shaun, tons of private members bills right now being worked on, and this is just one of them right now.
Yeah. You'd think it lost some political will. Like with the Conservatives looking to really be in, the position to win the election, and they're talking about axing the tax. Why spend a lot of political time on this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's a matter of just keeping it as an issue And in the public discourse, it's maybe not necessarily about having it go all the way through before a conservative government repeals the carbon tax completely. And even there, we don't know exactly which parts of the carbon tax would all be repealed. There's the industrial side of things versus the consumer carbon tax. The consumer carbon tax is what we really deal with directly in agriculture. And that's where, we are expecting a conservative government would do that if they won the next election.
Yeah. Well, Evan, you're in the province that leads the charge when it comes to battling or fighting back against the carbon tax. You're a financial guy. How much of a cost? How significant of a cost is it on farms? What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, I think the original argument is that, it's, you get it back and all that, blah, blah, blah. Well, you might get it back on those first things, but what you're missing is the trucking, and you're missing all the, the fertilizer, and you're missing where it's put into practice all across everything. So when you look at it from an outside point of view and you just want your overall opinion without digging into the numbers, yeah, it's probably not significant enough to push. But to tell you the truth, when you actually break it down and see how many of our costs have been inflated, then it becomes a material number. I mean, for us, it could be upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars per year for our grain farm, and obviously that's scale, but it becomes a line item all of a sudden, where before it was just kind of hidden in other costs. If you broke it out and put it on the statements, all of a sudden now it's actually a talking point. So I mean, I like the bill and I want it reformed back to what it was. Do I believe it's going to happen? Probably not with an election year. And I mean, they're doubling down on carbon every time we see another discussion with Guibo and everybody else. But you are correct. It is having a financial hit on a lot of farms, especially on the grain drying side. I mean, we went through a 40-day harvest turned into a 60-day harvest for us, and we had that dryer moving every single day. You feel the effects.
Yeah, that's where it really does show up in some of that grain drying for sure. Lyndsey, the bloc put in this ultimatum of on 280, 282 being one of those demands. I think maybe there where they might have regrettably screwed up is the timeline is so short of October 29th. I heard a lot about 282 when I was in Ottawa this week in the hallways.
Right. So this one now, to shift to 282, just to catch everybody up, this is the one that, of course, says hands off Canada's trade people. You may not touch supply management. So we have talked about it a lot on the show, of course, of, is this even needed? Was it put out there just to call everybody's bluff on if they supported supply management or not? Is this really even a bill that is, a way to show that you support supply management? Does this tie the hands of Canada's government when we go to renegotiate CUSMA or USMCA? This one is creating, and all of these bills really, and we've got other ones to talk about too. This is a very busy parliament right now. There are so many moving parts. We've also got this, constant reminder of confidence motions coming up at every turn. We've got the Bloc and the NDP jockeying for leverage and trying to push these things through. 282, I think, is one of those ones that, it seems like everything is focused on the OAS right now, on the old age security, and the Bloc has put a very firm sort of deadline on that one as to having the Liberals agree. Then the NDP can come in and they can support or not. And I just feel like 282, I think, is going to continue moving forward. At the same time, like the Senate has a lot that it has to go through, right? The Senate has to pass these things back before they receive royal assent and all of those sorts of things. We've just got so many things going on. And I really do feel like 282 may be one of those ones that ends up not being worth all the aggravation that the parties have put into it, for sure.
Anybody else have an opinion on 282? Nathan Finney from CCA
Yes.
and I talked about it on a Wednesday show. I think everybody knows where I stand on it. Evan or Kelvin?
You or me, Kelvin?
Go ahead, Evan.
So I think after listening to, I did listen to your interview before, Shaun, and what I did is I reached out to a couple of my clients that are working in the supply managed side, because I was more interested in, from a Western Canada standpoint, what's their opinion on the bill. So, I mean, from my standpoint, I think it's being used as a political wand, if you want. So I'm not a fan just based on that. But the actual metrics of the bill itself and the supply managed side, a lot of the farmers, especially the supply managed guys in Western Canada, they're on board because we've got trade deals put through in the past with supply managed in there. So it's not as of right now, it's not a massive holdup. The other side they brought up that we've already given away small percentage of this, and it's a direct hit against our Canadian farmers, whether it's supply managed in the East, West. it is giving away part of the supply managed side of our economy. And then, I mean, the third one was, and this one might have been the most relevant to my brain, was that in the US, I mean, when it's open without supply managed, the barns get really big on scale. So you're looking at, let's call it 1.2 million birds in a barn, versus Canada, where all of Saskatchewan is closer to 1.2, mixed across a whole bunch of barns. So the risk of disease and stuff, supply managed actually holds back some of that risk, which then food security wise for Canada, economy wise for Canada, it keeps those prices in line. So not that I'm saying I agree with these guys, but I did want to bring forth that side of the discussion because I've never actually reached out and had that side of the discussion. I always listen to the grain farmers that like to complain back across.
Yep.
But I think the big one that we're looking at right now is, and the biggest effect I see is that this bill is just another split in our agriculture. And what I mean by that is as a consolidated front, you throw agriculture into one pool, we're big. Like we have power. But what they've been able to do over the last decade, let's call it, is split us into different segments. And all of a sudden we lose 90% of our bargaining power because we can't agree. Supply managers mad at grain's mad at livestock. If we actually had a consolidated front, we're one of the biggest. I mean, we're $150 billion industry when you mix in agri-food. We have power. And that's the biggest hit to me from just the 30,000 look in.
Yeah.
Kelvin, what are your thoughts?
Well, that last point Evan made is, I think, really important. And we know that there are some real serious and potentially divisive conversations that are happening in some of the general farm groups right now.
There are
over this. And so there's a lot of potential progress and goodwill that's been built up on other issues and things that we all agree on that could be lost or take a step back here if relationships are severed and that type of thing. And so I think that's something that needs to be considered here in terms of both sides, I think, are guilty at times here of not getting into the nuance. Evan highlighted some of the nuances there that he's heard from producers in Saskatchewan on the supply managed side. I think both sides are guilty of seeing this as really black and white, and it's not necessarily that much. Politically, I won't be surprised now. It sounds like this could get stalled here at the Senate committee stage. There's some senators that are pretty vocally opposed to it. We have heard that the Minister of Agriculture's office is calling Senate committee members and telling them to get moving on it. But it wouldn't surprise me if it is stalled here, even if the Bloc has given this October 29th deadline as an ultimatum to get it across the finish line to royal assent. There's potential that the Bloc could be upset about this not being passed, and the NDP doesn't want an election right now, so they're going to still support the Liberals, and so the Liberal government could survive. This wouldn't necessarily bring down the government, even if the Bloc doesn't get their way here. I think the Bloc's leverage that we talked about the last couple of weeks is maybe diminished a bit now that the NDP is showing that they're willing to still support the government too, even after ripping up their confidence and supply agreement with the Liberals.
Yeah, there's this, the consumer, the mainstream, the general Canadian is hearing about this 282 battle and this bill. Like I was on Canada Talks 167 yesterday on Jeff Sammett's show, Canada Now, and we talked about 282 and what does it actually mean and how does, how should the general public be thinking about this? So it's definitely grabbing some mainstream attention as well. Anybody want to dive into before we take a break, dive into 355 and horses export? No, Lyndsey? No?
You guys did great.
Well, if you missed that on Wednesday's show, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to Nathan, Finney, and I. Okay, before we take a break, I want to talk to you about the pre-emergent soil active herbicides, Valterra EZ and Fierce EZ from New Farm. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds. Spray this fall for up to 8 weeks of extended weed control next spring. Find out more by going to newfarm.ca. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM right after this.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results. Help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. This segment's brought to you by the Pioneer brand of canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate-tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens right here. You can find out more by going to pioneer.com/Canada. That's Optimum Gly. Love. Also the sponsor of our Agritechnica coverage from last year as well when we went over to Germany. Hard to believe that is a year ago, but you can still find all of that coverage. I think we did like 60 videos in 4 days. It's insanity. And all that is on our YouTube channel as well as at RealAgriculture.com. Hey, good news. We've punted the football, Kelvin, on the U.S. East Coast and Gulf port strike. I think they're going to raise wages about 62%. Doesn't sound like they've come to an agreement on the automation part of it, but for now, people are going back to work.
Yeah, this is kind of just a suspension of the strike until at least the middle of January. So they've agreed to extend the current overall contract with the International Longshoremen's Association. So yeah, good news that the ports are ramping back up and going to be moving again, because certainly there's we know that vast majority of imports and even things that are made in the U.S. move to Canada on a boat and come back to the U.S. as a consumer good. That type of thing that happens in certain markets as well. So this is great news for supply chains.
And Port of Montreal 3-day strike over, but we still do not have an agreement. So that one is really still up in the air. And go ahead.
It's kind of refreshing to see some creativity here and new ways of thinking. To me, at least, it seems with these strikes, though, where it's not just black and white, either on strike or not or working kind of thing. Like I like the flexibility that side they're showing here.
Okay, wait, hold on here. Okay, so yes, but
good?
Well, maybe on the surface, but underneath, if you're a shipper, how much confidence do you have in the fact your stuff is going to get somewhere? So if you're a buyer in Japan and you got to run stuff through the Port of Montreal, are you gonna now?
It's not much better than if they were on strike that way, but it just, I don't know. To me, there's got to be find some compromise in these types of situations. It so often seems like there is no room for compromise with unions.
Yeah, and I what I'm getting from a lot of our audience is I don't care if it's the union's fault. I don't care if it's the company's fault or the ports authority's fault. Just fix it. Just stop with these impasses.
And it's less. We've already moved on from the Vancouver grain workers strike that ended last weekend. That was last Friday. We were still talking, but that was still happening. So yeah, it's happening all over the place.
So on this particular, so the U.S. strike and even Port of Montreal, I can understand though the bigger issue is this conversation about automation, and that one's not going away anytime soon. Like I can understand where it is going to take some time to actually put language together that two sides are going to agree on. Money's one thing, and this has been, like, don't get me wrong, a 62% increase over 4 years or whatever it is. That's a huge amount of an increase. But like one of the fundamental issues that they have is that, these companies want to introduce more automation and, quote unquote, eliminate jobs. Well, that's a much more complicated conversation to try and reach some sort of consensus on. So yeah. I can see where it's going to drag out.
Yeah, Evan, I don't care if you're thinking farming or car manufacturing or working at a port. This topic of automation is that wave is happening and it's coming, and it's just how you implement and deal with it is really the question.
Well, and the problem, I mean, especially in agriculture, is just adoption, right? Like it's from an ag standpoint, there's more mechanics in these new machines than I even care to know. I don't even want to sit in a new tractor because I don't want to learn it. I like my old style. I like being over 40 and just focusing on my iPhone. But to tell you the truth, that's part of the problem, is that the automation is becoming so quick. And in agriculture, where we say we have labor issues, we should be the first ones jumping on this, because that's the solution in most minds. But again, we're not jumping on that either. So it's that side of it. And I mean, going back to our discussions on infrastructure in Canada and reliability of trading partners, I mean, these strikes, all they're doing is making that worse. And I'm with you, Shaun, of just get it fixed. I don't care. But the biggest part is just we went from a rail strike to a port strike, and it's compounding not only stress on the farms, but it's compounding just our whole infrastructure. And I mean, I was reading some stats of in 2020 when we had the Montreal strike, a 12-day strike cost us 11,500 containers sitting idle. So, I mean, and the same thing with the rail strike is we knew for every day this many, we're compounding the backup of this many loads of grain. So it's becoming one thing after another. And for a stressful year for a lot of farmers, I find it's just adding on. They're starting to feel a lot more pressure than before, and it's a policy issue. It's not something they actually have any control over at this point.
Yeah. The Port of Vancouver, in terms of manufactured goods and components, $50 million a day go through Montreal. Just in that sliver of things that are going through the port. What's interesting is there's a theory out there that they've agreed to this 62% increase in the U.S. with the ports on the East Coast and the Gulf, 62% raise for accommodation on automation. Kelvin, there's some politics inside the union there of selling out some members, right? Like, for those of you that are going to have jobs, it's a 62% increase. For those of you that are going to be automated, sorry, dude, find something else.
Yeah, that's how unions work, though. It's the same thing when you look at sports union negotiations, too. The rookies get thrown under the bus while the vets get the big deals, that kind of thing. So I think that is normal in union politics. But you're right to point out that level of detail. To me, the whole automation thing at port, what port operator or owner right now would want to handcuff themselves to not being able to automate? Look at the last round. The last time we had such major work stoppages at ports was in the 1970s when everything was shifting to containers. Well, we know where containers have gone since then. It's inevitable in many ways, isn't it?
Well, we want them to automate because that improves productivity, efficiency, and allows us to compete around the world, right? So
globalization and the low costs that consumer goods have these days is largely due to shipping containers and that innovation and that automation. And so, automation helps overall. And then that's where governments have to balance how much they cater to unions versus the overall health of the economy and overall consumer benefit, public good.
Well, we know from an efficiency standpoint of the Vancouver port, like, aren't we ranked one of the lowest efficient ports based on the US and Canada?
We are.
So we're terribly inefficient to begin with. So I just see automation having to come in, not just from a labor standpoint, but from we need to get stuff out standpoint.
Yeah. I want it noted, one piece of disappointing thing about this panel, I had no movie references today. I broke my streak. And also, 2, Kelvin was the first to do the sports reference, not me.
I was going to point it out, but I would like to note it. So there you go. I did note it. I am actually quite disappointed in you, Shaun. And way to go, Kelvin. And I don't think Kelvin has used the term inflation. So did some sort of Freaky Friday thing happen here where
I don't know, we got to be better.
Kelvin and Shaun have switched entirely?
Okay. Experience the most efficient system for delivering sulfur and phosphate to meet your crop's needs with Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST. This has been a lot of fun. Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. Everyone else as well.
Enjoy the playoff baseball, everybody. On top of all the college football that's happening, I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. Lyndsey, have a great weekend.
Yeah, okay, bye.
And Evan, really appreciate you joining us here. Evan Shout, Truth About Ag podcast. You can find wherever you get your podcasts, as well as RealAgriculture.com. Evan, thanks so much for joining us here today. Can't wait for your next appearance.
You betcha. Thanks, Shaun.
Okay, everybody, if you have any feedback on today's show, we want to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. Have yourselves a great weekend, and we'll chat with you again on Monday. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their new BY7204LL canola with Pod Defender shatter tolerance and Defender rated club root protection. Talk to your local retailer today.